Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind. Today, we are going to introduce you to Angie Hicks, the founder and chief customer officer of Angi. She co founded Angie's List and served as its chief marketing officer and on its board of directors, leading up to its acquisition by IAC's Home Advisor in October 2017. Angie, formerly known as Angie's List, is the comprehensive solution for all your home needs from repairs and renovations to products and financing. Angie has over 25 years of experience and a network of over 200,000 pros who have helped more than 150 million people with their home needs. Thanks for coming on the show, Angie.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, Angie, you got to tell your origin story because if I remember correctly, it is so different than today's startups.
It's very
You know,
different. We started Angie's List in 1995. So if you roll back in time to then, the internet was just starting. I think our first email address for the company was an AOL address. So, that was the time. There was no website. We were a call-in service and a newsletter. So my co-founder was renovating a house in Indianapolis, and one of his neighbors suggested he try this little business called Unified Neighbors. And he was like, oh, that's great. So we started using it, kept track of who was good and who wasn't when it came to home improvement. And he renovated that house, moved to Ohio, and then discovered there was nothing like that anywhere else. He had some bad experiences trying to hire contractors and was like, we should probably try to start something like this. I was just getting ready to graduate from college, and he encouraged me to move to Ohio, and we decided to give it a whirl. We started what was called Columbus Neighbors at that time, a little knockoff branding of the Unified Neighbors of Indianapolis. And we understood how the model worked from Unified Neighbors, but there was no marketing plan. So we decided to use the same marketing plan Unified Neighbors used, which was go door to door, except for Unified Neighbors started in the 70s when people actually answered their door, and door to door was very common. So instead, we decided that Angie, the introvert, who didn't really like kind of getting out there talking to people, would be our best salesperson, and I should just go door to door. I would measure success. I'm kind of a numbers person, so I was like, I'll spend a couple of hours going door to door in the evening. If I can sell one membership, so we sold memberships for $19 a year. If I could sell one membership, it was a great day. So, but we quickly learned that, door to door was probably more of a character building exercise for me than a sales plan for the organization. It was probably maybe 3 months in, and we started to do a little advertising in like the little local weekly newspapers and things like that to supplement. And thank goodness that caused the phone to ring and I could put away my door-to-door shoes because it brought me to tears sometimes.
how did it then go into more of a tech company? Because, you need
Yeah.
that tech stack to
Yeah.
have everybody connect. So you went
Right.
from like a newsletter, knocking on doors.
Yeah, and and we actually, so we were opened about a market, and we would field an office in that market because we thought local meant you needed to have people who were local to Cleveland or local to Columbus who were able to take the phone calls and be able to answer the questions because they knew the city so well, etc. I think it was in 1999. Our chief operating officer was like, look, I can't scale this business if we have, databases running for each little city. We can never put together a website because I don't have a central database. So he was given, I think, maybe 90 days to attempt to centralize a call center and bring the database together. It was bumpy, but we soon discovered it wasn't that I knew that the plumbing company was located behind the McDonald's over on, this street or that in the town. It was the fact that I knew that the plumber did really good work, and I had the reviews from homeowners that actually was really what was super important. So we were able to make that call center work. And then in 2000, we launched our first website, which even in today's tech world, it was a basic marketing website that was email based. I think we paid a couple $1,000s to, some college kids that put it together. And then my co-founder went to our chief operating officer a month or so into it, and he was like, hey, how's the website working? How's it performing? And he was like, well, about half of our new members are coming in via that website, via email. And he was like, I guess we better invest in a website.
Right. Did you always knew you were gonna start your own business, or did you
No,
have
no, no,
another
no. So
career in mind?
no. Like when I was in college, I wanted to be an actuary.
Oh, wow.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's intense. I
No
used
one
to work in
plugs
an
me
insurance
in and
company.
says, I should be an entrepreneur. And in fact, I mean, my option coming out of college was to do business consulting, which was totally normal. I was an economics major. It was the mid 90s. That's what I would do, right? My mentor in an internship, Bill, who became my co-founder, was like, hey, let's start this business. It's a crazy idea. Your parents are going to hate the idea that we're going to do this, but we'll raise enough money to pay you for a year. And the worst thing that happens is you end up with a good essay for business school. And I was like, okay. For a long time, I didn't think I had the characteristics of what an entrepreneur was. I viewed entrepreneurs as visionaries, risk takers, charismatic, all of those things. But what I learned over time was, I think one of the characteristics that is probably the unsung hero of an entrepreneur is perseverance. And that one I had, where it's like you were going to try a bunch of things and they're not always going to work, and you got to come back and figure out how to try it again. I always felt uncomfortable being labeled an entrepreneur. And then over time, I was like, oh, I kind of get it now. Yeah. Yeah. This is maybe the aspect of it.
Wow, I love that because we've interviewed so many startup founders and they've always have a very similar story, Jack. I don't know if you find it where they grew up around computers and they knew they were going to code and,
Yeah.
lo and behold, they were a tech genius that started this startup.
Right.
And I think this story is so relatable because I find just seeing this experience in middle of America, having a mentor push you along and say, hey, what are actually the real risks? You always have these like other options. You can go to business
Right.
school later. And obviously you went and got your MBA anyway.
Yeah.
Angie. So you got to kind of live the best of both worlds there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. I always encourage people, especially younger in their career, is just be open to opportunities. You don't know. Cause I think all too often people, they're 22, they're coming out of college and they're just like, I've got my 5-year plan or my 3-year plan. I want to go do this and this and this. And then I want to go to business school. I want to do this. They are so tunnel vision in that plan that they forget to see opportunities presented. Find someone that takes an interest in your career. That's what's important in a first job. You can do marketing anywhere, you can do product anywhere, you can do tech anywhere, but finding a spot where your boss takes a keen interest in developing your career will change your trajectory. And being open to ideas that you don't see because you don't have enough perspective is interesting. Like, Bill comes and says, hey, we should start this business. I'm like, every ounce of me wanted to say no, right? We could be talking about my business consulting career right now. We probably wouldn't be talking about it. Uh, because I think sometimes that happens.
I really appreciate that lesson because oftentimes we're told, oh, the right thing is to have this plan. If you're ambitious, it seems like, Jack, the more and more we speak to these founders, these executives, it seems like their career is not this perfect
It's never just a
little
straight
like,
line.
And a lot of failures. A lot of failures, by the way,
yes.
Rick.
Yeah.
Angie,
It
in
builds
our
resilience.
podcast, so many times people will just talk about their failures. I remember is the guy from Kajabi, and he led off talking about his failures, and I was very confused. I'm like, wait, you're in the podcast. You're supposed to say everything. This is like in the beginning. You're supposed to
Right.
be like, everything is great. You're doing wonderful. He goes, no, I failed at it, but it's okay. That's how this works. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're kind of right, because that is for a lot of people. You don't succeed right away. Most
Correct.
people just fail and they learn and they fail and they learn and they keep growing.
That's right. That's right. It's like it's one of those, you have so much fear about what that's going to look like, and then when it happens and you're like, "Oh, okay. Now I can go from here. That's not a part of me anymore." I mean, I would help people, like write recommendations for business school a ton, kind of, and people would be so set, like, I'm going this year, I'm going to do this, and I'm just like, I don't know if you're going this year. And I think you need to be flexible about that. I mean, I had a dear friend who, I think she applied to business school 3 different years and didn't get in. And in her third year, she went to Kellogg. I'm like,
Wow,
let's not be
that's
fooled. Like,
amazing.
it's like sometimes it's like the mix of things that I kind of joke around because I was like, I didn't get into Kellogg. They turned me down. Um, you don't know. So how are you thinking about differentiating your career and what's going to stand out on your resume and what's going to build into that story to make you unique? Because, there's lots of investment bankers or business consultants or, people that have started a business, but what makes you unique in that path?
Right, Rick, how different is it now? Like when we see all these startups, how they kind of get up and running, right?
Yeah, I would almost say it's really funny starting a startup more recently because people want to make it more complicated
Yes.
than it should be. Whereas for you, you started off with a great idea. You did things that did not scale, literally went door to door to sign up customers, contractors, right? You were building a marketplace business before,
Before
you
there were
know,
really marketplace businesses.
exactly.
Right. Right. I get the same question about reviews. People are like, so how did you decide to define what your reviews consisted of and things like that? And I was like, we were building a review business before there were review businesses as well.
Right.
So when we looked at kind of how we set up the standards for being able to give a review, we actually really looked toward journalists. We weren't going to accept an anonymous review. A reporter would not run a story without a validated source. And you know, because these decisions are important, right? I mean, these could be thousands of dollars that you're investing in a new roof or new flooring, etc. We wanted to make sure that there was really high trust in the quality of that information.
How did you build that brand early on to build that trust? Because, like you said, people are literally spending hundreds, thousands of dollars on, their most important purchase, their home. What separated you and what do you think gave you that trust versus, someone else?
I think, a number of ways that we built trust in the organization was, one, we were super transparent about the rules of the platform. Here's how reviews are collected. If a pro's not happy with a review, they can't change the review, but they can give a response, things like that. So we were really clear about how we were going to engage. Additionally, we also thought about like, hey, how do we brand this? We soon realized that Columbus Neighbors was not just the brand that was going to kind of roll off people's tongues. In fact, many homeowners were like, hey, you don't really have what I need. Like they thought the newsletter was the list and it wasn't dynamic. So we decided to attempt new name ideas. We thought about being the list, which was going to be like this militant kind of, we're here to protect the homeowner superhero kind of feel to it. We thought about naming it Jackie's List. Jackie was one of our board members' mothers who knew everybody in Ohio and Columbus, and she would be the one you would turn to if you needed something. And then my co-founder threw out that maybe we should call it Angie's List. He's like, hey, she's the one they talk to when they call in. There is a connection there. And even if Angie doesn't stick around forever, that story still works. So we ended up naming it Angie's List. I call it one of my many inconsequential decisions at the time. We had a few hundred members and it was in one city. It's not a big deal for it to be named after you, right? But that kind of took off. So I think that personal connection was valuable in building trust.
Now, how did the business grow? Which came first? Was it the multiple lines of contractors, the verticals, we could say, or was it the actual cities? Some of our listeners, they're thinking about starting their own companies, their own startups. It just seems so intimidating in terms of how and where they can grow when
Right.
there's just so many avenues that are open.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the things that even in our business, I mean, we were dependent on the homeowner content, right? Because pros could advertise with us only when they had good reviews from homeowners. Basically, homeowners were the ones driving the pool of potential pros that could advertise on the platform. We had to do that. And it was important for us because this is local. Like, that is great that we have plumbers in Indianapolis where I'm at, but you're in California, so it is worthless to you unless we have kind of good content of plumbers and electricians in your city. We approached it by a city by city basis to build some depth. so that we could get to a certain level of density in a city, and then we'd move to another city. In the early years, we were opening one city a year. For us, our biggest expense in the business was our marketing expense. And we marketed local at the time. There wasn't a lot of digital marketing back in, the late 90s, for example. I mean, it was offline advertising, but we always knew that there would become a point where the business could really transform when we could then be able to tap into national advertising. And that happened in 2005. We were big advertisers on NPR. I was getting ready to renew that contract, and my co-founder was like, "Hey, we should just see what NPR is like nationally. Let's just go see," because I was getting ready to spend, I think it was $1 million. And I was like, "Okay." So I go and check and come back, and I was like, "Yep, I think I can get the same deal for about 800,000." And he's like, "Great, that's great." He's like, "I bet you get some more cities." I'm like, "Yep, we sure do." We get I don't know, like 700 stations or something. We were buying 30 at the time. So we discovered that we were that we could get a lot more advertising just than what we could in those 30 cities. So we switched to national advertising at that point. We went from 30 cities to 100 cities in about 18 months.
And that's all from NPR.
Not from NPR.
Okay.
NPR was the litmus test. NPR was the one that kind of worked. And then we were like, okay, let's go look at, we advertised quite a bit in the local newspapers, was our local marketing strategy. So then we had to go find a new alternative. We switched to television advertising, and that's when it really took off. But we were just like, okay, we just have to go and use up the marketing. If we can make the economics work on these 30 cities, we just need to have as big a footprint as we can.
Do you feel like it was a race that you had to do this before others were nipping at your heels? Or at that time, there weren't a lot of competitors
Well,
doing the
it
same
was
thing?
actually interesting because there were a number of companies. I mean, we've watched kind of flows of companies come and go in the industry over the years. And one of those times during that process was probably, gosh, I'm trying to think, it was probably in the early 2000s when there was a lot of competitors coming in, and they were really looking at the business just on the pro side. So they were out trying to sell the pros like, hey, we can bring you homeowners. We were still collecting revenue from both sides of the platform, both the homeowners and the pros. And, it was the big debate, should we or should we not kind of flip the model at that point? And, that was kind of a continuing saga for us through a number of years, is when do you take down that consumer paywall? Because it was totally acceptable in these early 2000s that, that consumers would pay for content. And it became less so as we moved along. So we were able to make that wave and bet that it would work. So it's interesting because what was happening was, home pros were getting some leads from us even before they started paying, because they would get a review or two. And then we got like, hey, do you like what you're getting from, it was almost like our free trial. Do you like the business that's being driven by Angie's List? We can do more if you'd like to advertise, and here's your options there. And then obviously forward even a few more years, we ended up going to a freemium model in 2017, where like kind of the basic content and access to the reviews or to the pros was free to homeowners, but you could join a membership in order to gain extra benefits, but independent of just the content. I think that is always a conversation you have to have. It's like, where's the market going? Where should you be? And how do you evolve your offering to make sure you're staying competitive? I think that is a continual process that, you need to be careful that you don't get yourself too caught, but also don't go chasing things. We started Angie's List in the Midwest. We kind of joke around like, hey, I understand why people open companies on the coast, because there's lots of people there and you can expand a lot faster, which is true, because when we opened Chicago, for example, we took a long time debating whether we should open in Chicago. And guess what? Chicago was great because there's a lot more people in Chicago than in Indianapolis. But when you're growing, one of the things, we ended up attracting venture money from the coast. So we almost had the best of both worlds. We were in our little insulated view where we weren't kind of like latest kind of crazy trends that are coming, kind of on the coast, able to get connected the VC firms when it was necessary. So there was less cycling, I think, happening for us. So come open your business in the Midwest.
But is there something to it where they hear New York, right, or San Francisco or LA, But like in the Midwest, I think most people would say, "Oh, I'm sure they're very trustworthy. They're from the
Yeah.
Midwest. They're not New Yorkers."
Yeah.
Do you think that was part of it too? Where
I
number
think it's
one,
an element. I
yeah,
mean, it's also if you think about what the business is, we're helping you, kind of a lot of the traditional kind of suburban home kind of feel sits in the middle of the country, right? So it fit. We matched where our customers were. And, I think you're right. I mean, I think that Midwestern feel certainly was valuable. One of the things that when I was talking to the marketing team, when we had me a part of TV creative, for example, I was like, hey, the more visible I became, it's super important that I was my authentic self. This like there is no two, like you don't get to create a character. Like I am who I am, and that's what our limits are, and that's how we're gonna come across. So I'm gonna dress the way I'm comfortable dressing. I'm gonna talk the way I'm comfortable talking, and it always has to stay true because I have to live this life as well. And I think that was an important decision. While it didn't seem like a big decision at the time, it seemed pretty simple, but I think it was pretty valuable in that process of building out because I think it just was more authentic.
but does that put pressure on you to feel like, okay, I'm the face of Angie's List. I'm Angie. And now it all comes down to you. Just like Tesla, you think of Elon Musk. There's only really a handful of places where you have someone you've been doing this for about 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Who've been doing this and being, like, does that weigh heavy after a while? Like, I don't want to be that age. I just want to be behind the scenes for a while. Or no, you just love.
There are times when you're kind of like, hey, I'd love a little break or something.
Yeah.
And I learned you kind of think about how you're going to do vacations that you can really be away. And when my kids were little, I actually enjoyed going to Disney because there's so much going on at Disney, no one notices.
Mm. So they don't point and say, "Oh, wait, that's Angie." They're just
Yeah,
too busy
exactly.
doing
No
it.
one notices.
Yeah.
There's just so much going on,
Yeah.
You kind of, you kind of figure out your things. And, I've got, I'm like, in the community that I live in, like, people know that I live here and they see me at the grocery store, but it's like I'm around enough that it's not like, oh, there she is. You get that more so when traveling and you kind of forget. It's like I remember Bill and I were going through LaGuardia or something one day. And like we were just walking along and somebody's like, hey, is that Angie? And you just forget that. You just forget that that happens, but it's like, yeah, and like, like over the years, I mean, I always tell the team I've had the opportunity to interact with our customers in a way that is, really special and unique. And I have had incredibly positive experiences talking to customers. So I viewed it as a privilege in many ways because, it's like it's been fun to connect.
That last bit is pretty interesting to me because I find that for many startup entrepreneurs or founders, when they think about how they're growing with the business, they naturally think over time, I'm going to start hiring folks around me and they're going to be closer to the customer and they're going to take things off of my plate. But instead, you
Yeah.
seem to have done the exact opposite, where as the company has grown, you've
Yeah.
integrated yourself more and more closer to the customer in each of these new markets, in each of these new verticals. Why did you take that approach?
I think one of them was by necessity because I was so synonymous with the brand. There was an element that I was like, whether I was going to do it or not, like I was doing that in my life, right?
Right.
But then I also saw the opportunity that related to it. In fact, in the last couple of years, I've put more dedicated time on my schedule to just interact with our customers. I started having, chats with Angie. Pros in the network can sign up for, a 15-minute slot and we'll talk about, whatever they want to talk about. I started this one time. I did it with employees when our team was getting bigger and I was trying to stay. I was like, I was sad the day the company got big enough that I had to read name tags. And I'm not like this super charismatic person. So I was like, how do I relate to people and how do I stay connected? So I started office hours in the office. On Fridays, I'd have an hour and anyone could sign up. They could come ask me anything. And what I discovered was that offer set a very much a cultural tone in the organization. Even if you never came to the one office hour, the fact that it was accessible and available, it gets problem solved in the organization. I end up with ideas. I mean, I always walk away from these kind of conversations with more than I probably gave. It's just one of those where it's really powerful. So I did it with pros. And that worked really well. It helps the account management team get things resolved because the pros know that they can come and talk to me about it if they want. So it's like it cycles things quicker. It kind of shows us issues. I'm like, if I hear the same issue 2 or 3 times, let's go figure out what that is, because that means it's a bigger problem, because 2 or 3 actually means a lot when they're willing to sign up and come talk to you. And then I'm getting ready to launch the same thing with homeowners. I did coffee chats in the early days of Angie's List when I would travel a lot to different cities. I'd actually invite homeowners to a coffee shop in the city I was in. We'd just sit, chat, have coffee, learn about what things we could do better with the product, etc. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Rick, I'm trying to think, can you think off the top of your head, any companies do the same thing that Angie does? Like have those meet and greets kind of thing?
No.
No, right? I'm scratching my
I
head
mean,
trying to
we're
figure out.
in a tech world
Right?
where we're constantly thinking about ways of like, how do we make it more efficient? How do we talk to people less? It's like, let's use chat, let's use all these kind of things. And now we're living in a world of AI, right? It's like maybe we don't have to talk at all. And I just think that's full of, I'm not spending 40 hours a week doing these chats. I'm dedicating 2 or 3 hours a week to do this with the opportunity and the amount of intel and understanding and insights that I get during that time turn out to be really valuable. So I think it's about how do you create it in a way that it becomes a bit more instrumental.
I'm getting a sense in terms of the culture of the company already, just based on how you conduct your business with customers. But can you give us that sneak peek into what it's like to work at Angie? Can the employees come over and knock on your door on those Fridays, or whatever they might be? And what does it look like to work at Angie?
I mean, I absolutely encourage that. We live in a much more virtual world than we did back in the earlier Angie's List days. In fact, our team is hybrid. They can choose to work at the office, they can choose to work at home at their discretion, wherever they're going to be most productive. So, maybe it was like catching me in the office and saying hello. I always encourage people to do that. If I talk to new hires, I'm like, you know what? I'm not the most outgoing person. If you see me, stop me. When we're in the office, I try to have lunch in the common area because I just want to hear what's going on, because I think that is a great way to build the culture in a informal way. But then also send me a Slack, shoot me an email. I will respond. I promise. I mean, I think it's just like those little things. Sometimes some of the best tools you learn are probably those nice things you learned in kindergarten. If you say you're going to do something, go ahead and do it. If someone says hello, say hello back. If they reach out to you, respond. And it's those kind of things that help people feel good about it. I mean, I remember one time I had a woman come up to me, and she was a new sales rep for us. And she came up to my cube one day and she was like, I just have to talk to you. Like, when I sell something, I've got to have the passion of the person that started it. So we spent 10 minutes talking about it. And she went off and became one of our best sales reps. It's one of those fun stories of I view that as a lot of my job, right? Like, a lot of my job is to help people be excited about what we're doing and help them be productive.
I appreciate that insight, because I think there's this rush when you're growing to try to, copy other founders. It's like, oh, well, this company, this is how they did it. So, if we're going to go to that stage of company or that level,
Yeah.
we have to do it exactly the way they do it. I find it so refreshing that your approach is just, let's be mission oriented, let's be value oriented, let's get down to the basics. And that is actually how we're going to run our business. And you could see it in every single surface area, right? With employees, with your
Yeah.
pros, with your customers, your homeowners. I think working in that kind of environment really gives a sense of clarity, right? In the
Right.
sense that I know exactly how to handle these things, even if I
Right.
haven't seen it before.
Yeah, like some of our values are build lifelong customers, simplify. I mean, just things like that. They seem not complex, but
Great.
taking care of home improvement is a complicated business. And, we
Right.
came together as we brought multiple companies together. Like, simplify is a very meaningful word in our organization right now. It's like, why are we making this complicated? Let's not. We have to live in some portion of complicated because, there's different, we have 500 different tasks of home improvement, but let's not make things unnecessarily complicated.
Angie, I'm just curious, I don't know if you ever go on LinkedIn, you'll see people on their bios who be like, X ABC widget company, X this company, and just moving on to the next play. What made you decide to say, hey, I'm not going to be that person who like, okay, I'm going to do an exit, made a lot of money, was successful, I'm just going to peace out or just start something new.
Yeah.
But you just stayed there, which is so cool because you don't, right, Rick? You don't see that too often, right? You see these CEOs who move on, go somewhere else, just try to
Right.
start something new.
And I think part of it is just I love what we do. And I think, like if you think about it, we started this business, I was 22. Like I didn't really know much about home improvement, where I was in my life. I was just a scrappy college graduate that was willing to go figure things out. Now, kind of 30 years later, I've owned a number of homes in my life and I've done a ton of projects, and my appreciation and understanding of the importance of what we do just grows over time. So I think that is part of it. I just really like it. And then when I think about, am I happy? Am I doing what I want to do? It comes down to two things. Do I like the people I'm working with? And am I learning new things? If I can say yes to both of those, I'm good. But there is effort. I mean, when you've been in a career for 30 years, that second question sometimes is hard. I have to put purposeful time aside to think about, how am I going to not make this mundane and kind of the same? It's like, yes, I've heard this question before. Like I know how I can give you 3 answers and tell you 4 different ways that this could play out. But you have to kind of reinvent yourself, I think, through that process. And that's where I've started bringing back these chats, for example, because it's something that really energizes me. And it's also a way for me to, pick up insights and get reconnected and bring some new energy. Also thinking about, I think one of the things you also have to be careful of being in a career as long as this is that you don't automatically dismiss something because you've seen it play before. Because you always have to remember it's different times, it's different people. Even the customers could be different today. So sometimes you can get yourself in the trap of like, yeah, that's probably not going to work because, we've tried it before, XYZ, kind of making sure that you're providing space and allowing evolution to happen and innovation to happen. It's just different time, different space, different people. Solutions might fit differently today.
Now, how do you keep your team motivated along those same lines, right? Because I imagine for some of them, they're almost running on autopilot, right? Where you've seen the exact same problems, or maybe it's just a slight different variation because it's maybe a new market or a new area or a new vertical. How do you keep that refreshing sense of work?
I think part of it comes to not everybody's been around as long as I have. So we've got fresh new
Sure.
people that are coming in to think about the problems differently, which I think gives a fresh perspective, fresh debate. I tell people you only get to be new once in the
Right.
organization. And like that time, whether it's the first 2 weeks, first month, first 90 days, you name it, is really precious. Like ask every question you can, question everything that's going on, because pretty soon, I can't tell you when it happens, then you become the one that is like, yep, this is how we do it because you've been around long enough. So embrace and celebrate newness. I think encouraging people to take on different responsibilities in the organization. I'm a firm believer that I'd rather lose someone talented to some other team in the organization than to lose them to some other company. So how are you thinking about career paths and things like that? It's like, oh, I've always wanted to do this or that. And don't be afraid, sometimes people just need to go and experience something else so that they might come back to you too, which is neat. I was getting off a plane a few years ago and this young guy comes up to me and says, hey, Angie, I just wanted to say hello. I used to work for you years ago, right out of college. I got my career started at Angie's List. I've since gone on and done other things, but I can't thank you enough for the foundation that you helped create for me in my career. I will always be thankful for that. And it was a young man I hadn't interacted with personally, but he was a part of the organization and the culture. And, seeing how you can make an impact even with folks that may not be with you anymore, but seeing that as one of the neatest things that happen in your career.
Yeah, that got to feel great when that happens, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I really appreciate all of the lessons that you've been able to share through your time at founding and continuing at Angie. Thanks for coming on the show, Angie.
Sure. It was very
Thank
fun.
you, Angie.
That's it for The Blind Ambition. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.